What happens when an undercover CEO discovers his own company is pushing employees to the breaking point? Logan Grayson, the head of Sentinel Global Security, thought his company was running smoothly until he stepped into the brutal world of its training program. What he found was shocking: overworked recruits, unfair treatment, and corruption festering beneath the surface. As Logan fought through the ranks, he realized the system was failing those who risked everything for Sentinel. Would he have the courage to fix what was broken? Stay tuned to uncover the truth behind this explosive transformation. Logan Bennett sat in his high-rise office overlooking the city skyline, the headquarters of Sentinel Global Security standing tall as a beacon of elite private security. From high-profile executives to government officials, Sentinel was the go-to company for protection. Built on discipline, strategy, and trust, Logan had spent years crafting its reputation as the best in the industry. But now, something was wrong. Reports had begun trickling in, whispers of overworked operatives, unfair promotions, and rising turnover rates. Employee complaints about favoritism, long hours, and toxic leadership landed on his desk, contradicting everything Sentinel was supposed to represent. At first, his executive team dismissed the concerns. They claimed it was normal in the private security industry. Only the strongest endured, and those who complained simply weren't cut out for the job. But Logan wasn't convinced. If even half of these reports were true, Sentinel wasn't the company he had built. It was something far worse. Data could be manipulated and meetings could be scripted, but the truth was in the field, among the agents themselves. Determined to uncover what was really happening, Logan made a bold decision. He would go undercover as Leo Carter, a new recruit entering Sentinel's elite training program. Stripping away his status and title, he would step into the grueling reality of life as an operative and see for himself what Sentinel had become. What he didn't expect was that what he found would shake him to his core and threaten everything he had worked for. Dressed in standard-issue tactical gear, Logan, now Leo Carter, stood in the dimly lit training facility, surrounded by a dozen recruits who had no idea they were standing next to their own CEO. The Sentinel Global Security Training Program was infamous for its intensity, designed to weed out the weak and prepare only the strongest for the demanding world of private security. Logan had expected it to be tough. He had personally approved the training curriculum years ago, but what he experienced firsthand was beyond anything he had imagined. From day one, the atmosphere was cutthroat, fueled by an unspoken hierarchy that had nothing to do with skill. The instructors, particularly Sergeant Dwayne Mercer, a hard-nosed veteran with a reputation for breaking recruits, pushed the trainees to their physical and mental limits. It wasn't the challenges that concerned Logan, it was the favoritism and abuse. Mercer openly belittled certain recruits while giving preferential treatment to others. A few trainees, particularly those with connections to upper management, skated through the program with minimal effort, while others were pushed to breaking points. One recruit, Damian Cruz, a former Marine with years of field experience, was singled out repeatedly. He was forced into extra drills, given impossible tasks, and publicly humiliated despite being one of the most skilled trainees. Meanwhile, Bryce Connors, the son of a Sentinel executive, was allowed to slack off, receiving constant praise despite failing basic evaluations. The injustice was blatant, but no one dared to challenge it, not unless they wanted to be pushed out of the program. Logan could feel the resentment and exhaustion brewing beneath the surface. The trainees weren't just competing for a job, they were desperate to survive in a system that was rigged against them. This wasn't the Sentinel he had built. The company's core values of discipline, fairness, and teamwork had been replaced by power plays, corruption, and fear. Logan clenched his fists as he completed yet another grueling round of push-ups in the sweltering training facility. He had come here to see the truth, and the truth was far worse than he had anticipated. If this was just the beginning, what else had been hidden from him? As the weeks passed, Logan, still undercover as Leo Carter, began to see the brutal reality of working for Sentinel Global Security. The trainees weren't just being pushed to their limits, they were being broken down, exploited, and discarded the moment they were no longer seen as useful. He had built this company believing in excellence, loyalty, and opportunity, but what he saw firsthand was a toxic system, where power and privilege ruled over skill and dedication. For many recruits, Sentinel wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. Many had left the military with nowhere else to go, hoping to find stability in private security. Others were former law enforcement officers who had been pushed out due to budget cuts or politics. And then there were those like Damian Cruz, highly skilled but systematically ground down by leadership that saw him as disposable. Despite being one of the most competent recruits, Damian was routinely assigned the most dangerous and exhausting drills. His gear was accidentally swapped out for faulty equipment, and his requests for medical attention after a brutal hand-to-hand combat session were ignored. But what angered Logan most was the pay situation. Recruits had been promised competitive wages, yet overtime pay was mysteriously missing from their checks, and trainees were being charged for damaged equipment even when the damage wasn't their fault. Logan also saw how connections determined success. The privileged few, like Bryce Connors, the executive's son, got promoted despite failing crucial field tests. Meanwhile, those who genuinely worked hard, like Damian and other veterans, were overlooked, reprimanded, or quietly forced out before their contracts were finalized. The worst part? Complaints went nowhere. HR was a revolving door of excuses, and any attempt to report unfair treatment resulted in coincidental terminations. The final straw came when Logan overheard Sergeant Mercer bragging about pushing people out on purpose. "We keep the hard workers desperate," he sneered during a conversation with another instructor. "The second they start getting comfortable, they get lazy, so we make sure they never feel safe." Logan's stomach turned. He had prided himself on running a company that valued its people, but the reality was far from it. His employees weren't thriving. They were trapped in a system designed to exploit their skills while keeping them too afraid to ask for better. That night, Logan sat alone in his bunk, staring at the cracks in the ceiling of the barracks. He had built this empire, but somewhere along the way, it had rotted from within. Now he had to decide. Was he going to let Sentinel continue down this path, or was it time to burn it all down and rebuild it the right way? Logan had seen enough to know Sentinel Global Security wasn't the company he thought it was. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The day started like any other, another grueling training operation, another test of endurance. But this wasn't just a routine drill. This was an extraction simulation, a live fire exercise designed to push recruits to their limits. The recruits were split into teams, tasked with retrieving a VIP from a simulated combat zone. Logan was placed on a squad with Damian Cruz, Noah Carter, and Bryce Connors, Sentinel's golden boy. But from the start, something felt wrong. The mission parameters were deliberately vague, and the instructors overseeing the exercise, Sergeant Mercer included, watched with an unsettling smirk, as if they were waiting for someone to fail. As soon as the exercise began, Logan realized the odds were stacked against them. Their gear was incomplete, helmets missing, body armor one size too small. The simulated enemy force, usually made up of trainers playing the role of hostiles, was suspiciously aggressive. Damian and Logan took cover behind an overturned vehicle as paint rounds, designed to mimic real bullets, pelted them. But as Damian returned fire, he suddenly dropped to the ground, clutching his ribs in pain. Logan's heart pounded. The round had hit too hard. Logan reached for Damian, only to feel something warm and wet on his hand. Blood. The so-called paint rounds weren't training rounds at all. Someone had loaded live ammunition into the mix. Logan's mind raced. This wasn't just an exercise. This was sabotage. "Man down!" he shouted, but the response from the instructors was chilling. They just stood there, watching. No one moved. No one called for medics. Bryce Connors, who had been cowering behind a barrier, finally stepped forward, only to bark, "Leave him, it's just a drill." Logan's blood boiled. Damian was bleeding out, and these people were treating it like an inconvenience. Without hesitation, Logan lifted Damian onto his shoulders and sprinted toward the extraction point. Noah ran ahead, shouting for a medic, but when they arrived, the so-called emergency response team wasn't even waiting. It took a full 10 minutes before help finally arrived. 10 minutes Damian didn't have. Later that night, Logan sat outside the barracks, fists clenched. Damian had survived, but barely. If Logan hadn't been there, if he hadn't carried Damian to safety, he would have died for a training exercise that was nothing more than a death trap. That was the moment Logan knew this wasn't just incompetence. This was a system designed to break men, to weed out the strong in the most brutal way possible. Sentinel wasn't just a failing company, it was a ticking time bomb, and if Logan didn't stop it, more lives would be lost. Logan had seen enough. Sentinel Global Security was more than just broken, it was rotting from the inside. He had witnessed firsthand how recruits were pushed beyond safe limits, how lives were treated as expendable, and how leadership either turned a blind eye or actively encouraged the brutality. But Damien's near-death experience was the last straw. Someone had loaded live ammunition into a training exercise, and no one was being held accountable. If he didn't act now, more men would end up like Damien, or worse. Logan stormed into Sentinel's main office, his jaw tight with fury. He had arranged a meeting with Captain Elias Mercer and the company's chief operating officer Vincent Radford, under the pretense of feedback from training. But Logan had no intention of giving them feedback. He was about to tear their empire apart. Mercer sat behind his desk, arms crossed, that smug smirk still plastered on his face. Radford, dressed in a sleek, expensive suit, barely glanced up from his tablet. "Well, Carter?" Radford drawled. "I hear you've been making quite the impression." Logan threw a blood-stained training vest onto the desk. Damien's blood. "That's what your training program looks like in reality." His voice was controlled, but every syllable carried barely restrained rage. "Someone loaded live rounds into our exercise. Damien crews nearly bled out on the field, while your so-called instructors stood by and watched." Radford frowned, setting his tablet down. Mercer, on the other hand, chuckled. "You're overreacting," he said, leaning back. "Cruise is fine, sometimes accidents happen." Logan's hands curled into fists. "An accident? That's what they called it?" "An accident is a mechanical failure," he said coldly. "Not a recruit getting shot in a training drill, not instructors refusing to call medics, and not a culture that rewards the strongest by destroying everyone else." He turned to Radford. "How much of this are you actually aware of?" Radford sighed. "Listen, Carter, this company is built on discipline. It's a high-pressure job, and we train our people accordingly. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you're in the wrong place." Logan clenched his jaw. This was it. This was why everything was so toxic. Because Sentinel's leaders believed that abuse was discipline, suffering was strength, and casualties were just part of doing business. He reached into his pocket and placed a small recording device on the desk. "I recorded everything. The accidental live rounds, the delayed response, the way your trainers laughed while a man bled out. I have statements from multiple recruits. And if you don't act, I will—" For the first time, Radford looked genuinely rattled. Mercer's smirk faded. "You wouldn't," Mercer hissed. Logan met his gaze without blinking. "Try me." For the first time, Sentinel's untouchable leadership looked afraid, and Logan wasn't done yet. The fallout was immediate. Logan's evidence sent shockwaves through Sentinel Global Security, shaking the company to its core. The board of directors, previously oblivious or willfully ignorant to the abuses within the training program, had no choice but to take action once the recordings and testimonials surfaced. Within 24 hours, Captain Elias Mercer was removed from his position, stripped of his rank, and escorted out of Sentinel headquarters. Vincent Radford, who had attempted to downplay the crisis, found himself under scrutiny as well, forced to resign before the scandal destroyed his career entirely. For the first time in years, Sentinel was forced to look at itself in the mirror. The ruthless, only the strongest survive mentality that had defined its training programs was no longer excusable. Logan, now reinstated as CEO with full control over internal operations, wasted no time in making sweeping changes. The first move, a complete overhaul of the training program. The brutal, unsafe drills were eliminated, replaced with rigorous but ethical training methods focused on skill building rather than raw endurance. Instructors who had perpetrated abuse were fired on the spot, and in their place, Logan brought in seasoned professionals who knew how to train soldiers without dehumanizing them. Physical endurance was still part of the process, but so was mental resilience, leadership training, and teamwork. Qualities Sentinel had ignored for far too long. Next, Logan tackled the company's internal policies. He established a whistleblower protection program, ensuring that any recruit or soldier could report abuses without fear of retaliation. Anonymous complaint systems were implemented, and an entirely new HR division was formed, one that answered directly to Logan, not to executives eager to bury problems. Pay structures were adjusted, making sure Sentinel's operatives were compensated fairly for their sacrifices. No more delayed hazard pay, no more empty promises of bonuses that never arrived. One of Logan's most important initiatives was checking in with those who had suffered under Sentinel's old leadership. He personally reached out to Damian Cruz, who was recovering from his injuries, and offered him a role in Sentinel's new leadership training program. Damian, though wary at first, accepted. His first-hand experience with Sentinel's failures made him the perfect candidate to ensure those mistakes were never repeated. As the changes took effect, Sentinel Global Security began to resemble the company Logan had originally envisioned. It was no longer a proving ground for the toughest, it was a force that shaped professionals with skill, integrity, and respect. Logan had exposed the rot, but now he was rebuilding Sentinel from the ground up, and this time no one would be left behind. Damian Cruz never expected to return to Sentinel Global Security, not after what had happened to him in training. He had barely survived an accidental live-fire exercise, left bleeding while instructors mocked him for his weakness. The experience had nearly cost him his life, and whatever respect he had left for the company he once dreamed of serving. But when Logan Grayson, now fully reinstated as CEO, reached out to him personally, offering not just an apology but a chance to rebuild Sentinel from within, Damian hesitated. Could he really trust that things had changed? Logan wasn't asking for blind faith. He was offering real power to make a difference. Sentinel had burned Damian once, but now it needed him. Logan laid everything out on the table. The training program was being rebuilt from the ground up, toxic leadership had been purged, and the brutal, inhumane system that nearly killed Damian was being dismantled. But to truly ensure it never happened again, Logan wanted Damian in a leadership role. At first, Damian wasn't sure he wanted to return. He had every reason to walk away, to leave Sentinel behind as a bad memory, but then he thought about the recruits who would come after him, the ones who might suffer the same way he did if someone wasn't there to protect them. He wasn't just given an opportunity, he was given a mission. With careful consideration, Damian accepted the position of Director of Tactical Training, a role that put him in charge of reshaping the very program that had once broken him. No longer would recruits be treated as disposable assets. Instead, Sentinel's new training regimen focused on developing skills, fostering leadership, and preparing soldiers for real-world situations, without grinding them into the dirt. The change was immediate. Recruits who once feared training now found it challenging but fair. The strongest were no longer those who could endure abuse, but those who could lead, strategize, and protect their teams. Damian implemented regular wellness checks, support systems for recruits struggling under pressure, and an open-door policy for grievances. One evening, as Damian watched a new group of recruits finish a grueling but safe endurance drill, Logan approached him with a rare smile. "You've done good work here," he said. Damian nodded, watching the recruits high-five each other after completing their run. "For the first time," Damian said quietly, "Sentinel feels like a place worth fighting for." Months after Logan Grayson's return and the sweeping reforms at Sentinel Global Security, the company was no longer just surviving, it was evolving. What was once a brutal, exploitative corporation that thrived on fear and unchecked power had transformed into an elite force built on respect, discipline, and honor. The toxic leadership that had treated operatives as expendable assets was gone, replaced with experienced professionals who understood that strength wasn't just about endurance, it was about intelligence, teamwork, and trust. The changes were felt at every level. Recruits no longer feared training, they embraced it. The once cruel initiation process had been replaced with rigorous but fair exercises designed to forge leaders, not break spirits. Retention rates skyrocketed, and for the first time in years, Sentinel was no longer bleeding talent to competitors. Veterans who had once been discarded or disillusioned by the system returned, drawn by the new mission, to protect, to serve, and to uphold the values that had once been lost. Damian Cruz, now Director of Tactical Training, oversaw the first graduating class under the new Sentinel program. Standing at the podium, he looked out at the fresh operatives, not broken, not afraid, but strong, disciplined, and ready for the field. Logan stood beside him, watching with satisfaction as the future of Sentinel stepped forward, not as disposable soldiers, but as professionals with a purpose. As Logan left the training grounds that evening, he took one last look at the towering Sentinel headquarters. It was still the fortress it had always been, but now it represented something more than power. It was a beacon of change. For too long, Sentinel had operated in the shadows, ruled by unchecked ambition and cruelty. But now, thanks to those who dared to challenge it, it stood as a force for good, a company reborn, not through deception and fear, but through strength, integrity, and leadership that truly valued the people who made it great. The story of Logan Grayson's undercover mission within Sentinel Global Security teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and the true cost of neglecting those who form the backbone of an organization. For years, Sentinel prided itself on being an elite security force, yet its toxic leadership exploited recruits, prioritized profit over people, and fostered a brutal work environment. Logan, like many executives, once believed in the strength of the company's vision, but he had never truly seen the human cost behind the success until he went undercover. His journey exposed a harsh reality. An organization is only as strong as the people who keep it running. When employees are undervalued, overworked, and treated as expendable, even the most powerful institutions will crumble from within. The blind pursuit of dominance had weakened Sentinel, and it took direct intervention, accountability, and genuine reform to rebuild it into something sustainable. The key takeaway? Leadership isn't about demanding respect. It's about earning it. True power comes not from fear, but from trust, fairness, and the ability to inspire others to be their best. A company thrives when its people thrive, and without them, even the mightiest empire will fall.